We hear our political leaders talk about making informed, data-driven decisions. Well, the data is yelling, but it's falling on deaf ears. It's no wonder. I find myself saying this as I learn more and more about our plight, about our circumstances. It's really no wonder. Hi, I'm Chuck Cantrell, and today I'm here with Regina Celestin Williams. And Regina is the executive director of SV at Home.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
But you have a much longer career. You started, I think you have the unique distinction of your entire career being focused on housing. Is that right?
That's right. I really switched my focus in undergrad. I was at Stanford University majoring in engineering, and I took a course on the design and construction of affordable housing. Yep, that's right. And it took me all around the Bay Area. It took me to San Francisco to learn about housing for folks doing reentry from the carceral system.
Okay.
It took me to Half Moon Bay to learn about farm worker housing. And it took me to San Jose to learn about affordable housing for working families.
Wow.
And after that course, I said, this is what I want to do, mostly because what I learned in that course was that I had grown up in affordable housing. I had spent pretty much my entire life living in housing funded by the Section 8 program, which is a HUD program.
Okay. Wow. That's pretty interesting that I had the same kind of trajectory with economics. And
Oh, okay.
changed my life.
Yep,
What
it
do you know?
certainly did. And when I realized that there was a whole slew of people who were committed to making housing specifically based around families' needs, whatever their needs were, and catering that housing to make sure that folks had that basic need met and were able to raise their children and work their jobs and stay rooted in community, I said, this is what I want to do. I want to be a part of that work and a part of that collective of people. And so I went straight to graduate school with the plan of going into affordable housing development.
Wow. Okay. I'm glad you have that great focus. We need that. So we hear it all the time here. Is the Silicon Valley in a housing crisis?
You know, yes.
Okay.
I think the challenge is that word crisis, because where we are is we are in the heart of an economic engine, and we're relying on market systems that don't serve everyone.
Okay.
And so when you kind of evoke the word crises, it makes you think that there's an urgent need. So I have to do something that has quick results. But the reality is, this region especially has been sort of digging itself in a hole to create the crisis that we have today for decades.
Okay.
And so when you have a system of housing that doesn't work for most folks, and then you have a tremendous economic wealth being generated out of, this great economic engine that is Silicon Valley, then you're going to get to the point that we are, because those barriers have existed over time. They've existed since the beginning of time, you could really argue.
Yeah.
And so it's a crisis because of the extent to which folks are harmed, and we can't approach it with quick fixes. We have to think about the underlying systems that need to be dismantled, that need to be truly transformed so that our housing system serves everyone. It's just exasperated here, but nothing's changed. It's always been this way. We really need to work to change the system, and we need a better system that hasn't existed yet.
Okay. So you mentioned that the way that there was a crisis, but not for all, essentially, that we're in a pretty abundant valley here.
Yes, that's right.
Who's missing? Who is it not for? What was the structure not serving?
You know, that's a really interesting question. I think that at the end of the day, because of the tremendous amount of wealth that's being created and the small amount of housing that's being created to go along with all of the jobs that have been produced and just how far we're lagging behind, more and more folks are being impacted. I mean, at this point, who's not impacted by the fact that there's a lack of housing affordability? Because if you aren't impacted directly, then you certainly know someone, a neighbor or a former neighbor, the folks who work at the restaurants that you frequent, the folks who work in your doctor's office, the folks who teach your children, educate your children, are impacted. So if, you know, not you directly at this point, someone that you know indirectly. But we also know that at the end of the day, the most marginalized groups are going to be harmed the most. So, you know, as two Black people sitting here talking to each other, we know that Black people, people of color, you know, LGBTQ plus folks, immigrants, you know, there's going to be the folks who live at the margins are going to be harmed the most by this system. And, you know, the numbers absolutely demonstrate it for folks who look like you and I.
Yeah, actually, I think historians might argue that Black folks have always been in a housing crisis. From the very beginning of our time here, we've been forced into segregation. And that segregation has been reinforced by courts, by HUD, by banks, by insurance companies, by real estate agents and neighborhood associations, all the way down the line. So for us, it may be a little bit more different, and maybe that might explain why the impact on us is so disproportional. If you look at, for example, the unhoused community here, you know, Black folks who only make up 2.35% technically of the population, which is declining fairly rapidly. But at the same time, we're 19% of the unhoused population. I mean, that's insane.
That is insane. I think, you know, what you're referring to, Chuck, is really about a lack of access, dislocation, really, right? Like not being able to have permanence, and we've talked about this, not being able to have stability, the ability to build wealth. I think you're also highlighting a connection that a lot of researchers have made between housing and health and lifespan and wealth, the ability to build wealth. And you can't separate those things. And if folks, if there is an effort in justice to limit your access to wealth building, then it's going to limit your access to stable housing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so how did we get here? You mentioned earlier that this has been a problem for a long time that just got worse. How did we get to this point?
Yeah, I mean, all the way, if you're talking about the Valley, I think that the history of the Valley is extremely interesting. Looking at when the first migrants came in to work in the agricultural spaces and jobs, to when other waves of migrants came in to work in the canneries, and then what the tech boom starting in the early 70s really did to create a place where there were tremendous amount of opportunity and wealth building and jobs created, and just not a response that was equally supportive of that thriving economy in building housing and making space and room for everyone to continue to stay here and live here and thrive and be able to benefit from the prosperity of the region. So I think it's tremendously interesting because of what a short amount of time it's been since the tech boom, right? When this city and this county and this region really started to transform, and how, a lot of policy, a lot of, tight regulation around development and land use really prevented cities and communities and jurisdictions from responding to the growth that was happening. And somehow, some way, the United States, which is a place that was able to become this booming, global dominant economy because of the ability to build up, after taking land from indigenous folks, but really was able to build up around where economic opportunity was. This city, this community, this region didn't respond in that way. It did not build up in response to the economic opportunity. Instead, the economic opportunity pushed out a lot of folks who were already here and a lot of folks who serve the economic engine. People still work here and can't live here.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned the tech started the tech boom, a long boom, but in the 70s. And that's actually when Black folks really started moving into the Silicon Valley in the 70s. And that population actually kept growing until around 1990 and then suddenly stopped.
That's right.
And I think you're onto something there. I think there was something we were doing that made it difficult for Black folks to stay here.
Yeah.
And I look, I'm a planning commissioner, and I look at our history and I look at our zoning, and I can't help but think that the exclusionary zoning that we still have in place, even today, impacts our ability to build housing, or at a minimum, affordable housing.
Yeah. I mean, the way I look at it is zoning and land use regulation really has become a framework for how do I maintain the neighborhood and the community as I know it. And that's a challenge when you have growth. And the way that what I share with folks when I'm having conversations similar to this is if you have growth, especially in a city or a community or a region, you should expect change. Things should look different. And if we want a Silicon Valley that can house all of us, our neighbors, our children, our grandchildren, our friends, we should expect our communities to rapidly change because we're way behind.
Right.
So that corner store that's been the landmark for the last 30 years, it shouldn't be there anymore if it's low density. We should expect change to happen. We should expect for people to come back 5 years from now and say, wow, look at the change that has happened here in Silicon Valley. And it should be reflected in the vibrancy of our city, in the health of our neighborhoods, but it should look different. And so when people approach, zoning and they say, okay, how do I help things stay the same and, allow for certain things to happen, but mostly maintain the character of, no, we should want it to change to absorb the growth that's happening because it's still here. California is still the 5th largest economy in the world, and Silicon Valley still holds a tremendous amount of opportunity and prosperity.
Right. Even in what we call our area median income.
That's right.
People
growing.
think, oh, well, what does that mean? Well, what it means is roughly affordable is at the 80% level, which is not a small income in most places.
It's not. Yeah, I recently looked. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but
it's $100,200.
Wow.
Yeah, that's not a small. Where I grew up.
I think for a family of 4, the 60% of area median income is in the 6 digits.
Yes, it is.
And what that means is that we have families that are working, that maybe have 2 or 3 folks in the household that's working, and they still can't afford to live here.
Right. Yeah.
And we need those folks.
Yeah.
We need those folks not just because we care about them and they're a part of our community. We do, but we need those folks to be a part of our economy. Mm-hmm. We need them to be a part of our community. They have so much history. They have so much culture and things to add. And because we're working to make Silicon Valley a place where people can stay, where they have staying power, doesn't mean that we're holding on to the way that Silicon Valley has always been. Because people, I mean, when you bring more people to the table, you bring more perspectives. We grow and change every day, and so should our cities.
Yeah, I love your perspective. I mean, I think that's the way life should be for all of us.
Yep.
We can enjoy the company of everyone. We can house everyone
Yes.
at the level that they want and need to be housed, and we can all grow together as a community.
That's right. That's right. And we all have to recognize that it will benefit us all, right? So as our community, as our cities change and grow, because there is economic vibrancy. That means we are all benefiting. But it doesn't help any of us when a few benefit, which is what's happening, and everyone else is harmed and struggles and gets pushed out.
Okay. So we talk about affordable housing, and that doesn't really tell the story. What does affordable housing look like to you?
Yeah, affordable housing is really about housing that for the long term, whether it's rental housing or shared ownership or homeowner housing, but that particular home has preserved affordability for the long term.
Okay.
Because it's about making sure that we're creating assets that can continue to serve folks who may need that housing, may need that stability. So it can take a variety of shapes, like I mentioned, but it's really about having assets in our community that everyone has access to, right? No one, no matter what your income range is or your household income, you're not excluded from a community or a neighborhood. You have access to stay here because there's affordable housing in the community.
Okay. Why is that so important?
I mean, I think, for my own experience, I share that I'm here because my family had access to affordable housing. If we didn't have that stability, my mom being a single mom, having 3 daughters, we wouldn't have been able to perhaps stay in the community that I grew up in. My mom may not have been able to keep her job that she was at for 30 plus years. I wouldn't have been able to focus on my education and other pursuits. There's so much that affordable, stable, safe housing provides for a family that allows them to focus on meeting the other needs, getting to and from work, getting to and from school, having access to health care, being able to focus on healthy meals. You can focus on those other things when that one thing, housing, that's the majority of our incomes go towards housing. It's stable and you don't have to worry about losing it. And so, it allows us to have sort of that community that we're building on the lives and stories of folks who have been here. It allows us to have extended families. It allows us to have, all of the folks who do a range of services, provide a range of services in our communities. And it allows us to kind of release that burden. We talk about housing burden because it really does weigh on you to not be sure that you will have a home for yourself or your family tomorrow or next month or next year, because costs keep going up or because there might be some sort of health issue in the family. It allows you to be able to invest in the community, to shop at a store that's local, support the local school by volunteering, do all the things that we want folks who are engaged in our communities and neighborhoods to do, because you don't have that weight of worrying about housing costs.
It literally sounds like the key to unlocking opportunity for families.
Yep, that's right.
That's profound. So, sounds like you might also think that everybody's worthy.
Oh, absolutely.
That this is not harmful to communities.
No, I think that, you know, if we think about we as humans and how we want to be with each other, we don't want to take, we want to be in community with each other. We want to share. We share our skill sets, our thoughts. We even want to open up our homes. There's, you know, communities in this area that have block parties. We want to be able to be connected. And one of the things that, you know, a lot of the media is talking about is like the prevalence of loneliness. And, you know, we as humans need connection. And we need to know, in order for us to be well, we need to know that you're well. And so I think that's like a deep fundamental thing about being humans, is that we actually want folks to be well. And that is the struggle right now, that we see how much people are hurting, people who are living unhoused, people who are getting pushed out and have to relocate to places that are far, or spending lots of time in their car commuting. We know that's not healthy, and we want to do something. I truly believe that the average person in Silicon Valley wants to see a change. They want to know that we can get to that place where everyone is living together, not necessarily harmoniously, but well. Right? We want to know that people are well. We won't get along with everyone, but we want to know that you're well and you have a stable home. And so we're looking for solutions. And so that is really what I see as a common thread in the rhetoric that I hear, the discussions. Everyone wants to understand, like, how can we get from where we are to a place where there is an abundance of housing and everyone has access to a home. And that's the hard part, is, you know, understanding that it's gonna take more than one solution. It just is, because there were so many decisions and policy, you know, agendas and barriers that got us here, and it won't be helpful to preserve very much of it. So if we're, you know what I'm saying?
That's an interesting question. So I'm going to ask you to do some of that hard work. I'm going to give you 3 wishes. If you could do anything, I mean, move heaven and earth, what 3 things do you think could be done? What would you do?
I think one of the things that I would do is create a mechanism that allowed folks, a funding mechanism that created a pot of money that subsidized folks' rental income. So similarly to guaranteed basic income, but really said, like, look, we're looking at the market. No home should be vacant. The cost shouldn't be a barrier. What do we need to do to make sure, we know that people need housing. What do we need to do to bridge that gap between what people can afford and what the rents are throughout the valley? So some funding bucket that says we're just gonna supplement the rent, because we understand it shouldn't be, you know, resident versus landlord. It really, because we want the economy to stay strong, it really is about how do we make sure that, you know, all of the communities are thriving and, you know, are able to remain viable financially. These housing communities, rental housing communities, and all the people who need housing can live there without becoming overburdened by the cost of rent. So I really would want to see something like that that's locally controlled. I think, you know, in a similar fashion, we have a ton of affordable housing homes that are ready to be built if there was funding to push those homes forward. And so I would, you know, magically fund all of those homes and say, let's just build them. Let's just see the cranes in the sky all over the cities, all over the counties, and build it out and get those homes up so that people could move in. With the third one, I think it would have something to do about access. I don't know exactly what it would look like, but it would be, you know, some sort of response to the fact that there are communities that have a tremendous amount of resources that have been exclusionary, and it shouldn't be that way. But I don't know what that magical mechanism is to help provide access to the resources that exist in this valley, so that, you know, no zip code determines someone's life expectancy. That just shouldn't be.
Okay. Wow. Well, I'm glad you decided to settle here, because we need you here. You're actually, your perspective is amazing. And I think it's a perspective that all of us should be able to embrace, because we should all want what you want here. Mm-hmm. I hope that we find those pots of money, that we actually get those into ballot measures and improve them so that we can actually take care of our community.
I appreciate that, Chuck.
I appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Well, no, thank you for joining me today. Let's hope that, let's hope Black folks can stay here a little bit longer.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this is Chuck Cantrell again for Dying to Stay Here.